Good day, ladies and gents, wherever you may be around the world, and welcome to Splendid Isolation number 163. Sorry, guys. We should have an interesting stream this week. I don't know what guests I'm going to have. Adam is joining us. He's just getting himself set up. But we've had quite a lot of things going on this week in British politics, one thing and another. Now, not only is the British Prime Minister an Indian banker, we now have an Indian in charge of Scotland, a non-white guy in charge of Wales, and a Pakistani, I do believe, in charge of Scotland, a non-white guy in charge of Wales, and a Pakistani in charge of London. And looking across the Irish Sea, of course, the Republic of Ireland has a, shall we say, not entirely Irish person in charge of them. Although, what I've been looking at on X, on Twitter today, is various immigrants in Britain claiming that the reason all these black and brown people are running Britain is because of the British Empire. I don't know what their excuse is in the Republic of Ireland, but in Britain apparently it's the British Empire. So I dare say we will be discussing that amongst other things today.
Is that the new Welsh First Minister?
Yes, I was just mentioning that one, Adam, and you've probably seen the same as I have, all these idiots on X, who are mostly immigrants themselves, of course, pointing out the reason for this, of course, is the British Empire. They're reverse colonizing us. They're saying that, and I was just wondering what's their excuse for the Taoiseach in the Republic of Ireland. As far as I'm aware,
it's like
the Republic
Sweden
of Ireland
as well.
never had an empire.
Like Sweden almost gets this worse than us because, of course, every European country gets different types of immigrants. The Germans get tons of Turks. We get like Pajeets and South Asians. Sweden gets like the worst of the worst of like Africans and Middle Easterners. And it's like you kind of have to sit there, but of course, like the obviously the karma thing, the cosmic justice thing is so ridiculous. Like like the Tory government literally comes in and like reintroduces 2-year post-study work visas, and like opens the door to like dependency visas. And these people are like, oh, it's cosmic justice. It's like, yeah, you floating up on a door and get a council house. Welfare is not conquest. No. It's not cosmic justice. It's not karma, right? You're not calling on the blood memory of your ancestors and picking up an AK. You're actually decidedly cringe and lame by comparison.
Yep. I do agree.
Yeah, it's like people have to kind of, because people on the right get kind of down on this stuff. Obviously the situation is pretty bleak, right? I'm not going to say people shouldn't be down, but people kind of do go into this thing where they go, oh, and it's an invasion. It's like, come on, it's lamest invasion ever. Like when we invaded people, we actually, rocked up in warships and went around in trad uniforms and applied actual conquest. What these people are doing by comparison is incredibly cringe. And
they're relying almost totally on British charity, basically, and assorted British government agencies and non-governmental agencies supported by the British government and laws enacted by the British government. It's just if you could believe the British government was British, you could say they were anti-British, but looking at the Conservative cabinet, I mean, there are so few there are certainly so few white Anglo-Celtic men in it that I find it difficult to say it's a British government, to be honest.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's basically, but this is the other thing as well. Like, to the extent that any leader, like Rishi Sunak, I mean, he kind of gets a bit of a pass because he's brown, right, for saying certain things. But if he didn't have said pass, he would be ousted for some of the things that he said. And so he's not really sovereign. Neither is most of the party at large. So even to the extent of which they have a bunch of brown people in certain positions, it's not indicative of any sort of like hostile takeover by that ethnic group, because they're not really particularly. The places where you could point to them having actual real power is actually like the fact that Indians now make up a larger percentage of landlords than white people in the capital. In places like that, that's kind of where more actual, I mean, even that's not perfectly representative of power, but that's an example of more actual representation of power in the society, as is people put into positions by diversity hires into places like, the civil service. You basically can't get into the civil service unless you're a woman, brown, or in a wheelchair. Or all of the above.
And they're trying to do the same thing to the armed forces, aren't they?
Yeah.
They're trying to do the same thing in the armed forces. That's why we had that big scandal, I don't know, what was it now, 8-9 months ago, about the Royal Air Force and straight white men not being wanted as pilots in the Royal Air Force, even though they form the overwhelming majority and backbone of the pilots of the Royal Air Force. Surprise.
Yeah.
They're doing this in every realm. From the most minor to the most important. The same thing is happening everywhere, constantly, every day, every week. I don't know what we do about it at the moment, because the parties we can vote for are not even against it. I mean, reform. I don't think we can take. I mean, you may have a different view on this, but I don't think we can take reform as a party seriously until they talk about stopping mass legal immigration into the UK, and they won't touch that with a steel-tip barge pole.
Yeah, reform. I mean, anyone that knows, I've been a member of reform, mainly as a means of hooking up like former disenchanted Tory voters, which has had some small amount of success, but not really much, because it's mainly just old people in reform. Of course, the problem with that, the problem is that I don't really know. Some people try to claim that they're containment. I don't really think that's the case. I think people like to throw that term around or use it a bit much, but although it's definitely a real thing that exists in our regime. But of course, the thing with reform is that then they're kind of made up of a lot of old guards who still fall into the same trick that a lot of Tory backbenchers have done for a long time, which is they're still trying to sort of attack the system from within the system's framings, which is like, avoid getting called racist, avoid this, avoid that. I mean, an interesting case study to look at, I suppose, although it's not entirely instructive, is still, and I'm going to keep harking on this, even though we've talked about it sort of several streams, over the last couple of months. But the AfD in Germany, where they basically turned around and they said, yeah, we will deport millions. And
yes,
they've suffered a small breakdown of support, but it's not particularly it's not particularly consequential. And of course, they can go on from this. They can grow significantly more now from this stated position, from putting it out there in the national conversation. And this kind of happens here as well, not within the party frame though, which is the disappointing part. It happens outside of the party frame. Everyone loves to hate on people talking about like the Twitter sphere and what's going on Twitter. Of course, and to an extent they're right. Twitter isn't real life, but you know, you've got someone like Tom Harwood, who goes on Question Time. Not that anyone watches Question Time anymore. Its viewership is minuscule compared to what it used to be. But they go on these various other public outlets. They're a presenter on a TV show. They get invited on other TV channels, and he's now making threads on Twitter. Not right now. This was a couple of weeks ago. Basically explaining why you logistically can't deport, you know, hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of people. And like the very fact that they've now been drawn into making this conversation. And of course, the reason why Twitter can be potent for that sort of stuff is because to a lot of them, Twitter is real life. It's where a majority of their connections outside of their immediate bubble take place. It's where the information transfers within their class. And there's no proper alternative for it yet, because Threads that was made by Instagram, or by Meta, I should say, is a heap of shit and various other things. And it's like, but of course the thing is that's all outside of the party apparatus. There's no extension of that within any party that exists of any particular size, even though there's clearly, you know, I think 2 streams ago we looked at the last by-election and like how the votes have come out of that and so on and so forth. You know, there clearly is a large subset of the British electorate who can be picked up by anyone. You know, it's just
I think there's a lot of people who've had enough. I really do, and increasing numbers.
Yeah, and they're not like all based monarchic trad kick the foreigners out types, but there's definitely a lot of people out there that don't have any sort of positive vision and don't have anything they can see themselves voting for, and you can pick those people up. And I mean, I've seen some of this. Like, one of the things that's come out of like the overproduction of elites that we've had is you've now got this enormous amount of people who have these various degrees that consider themselves part of the elite apparatus, but they, for example, struggle to afford a home. And it's like, you can go on, let's say, Reddit, right? There was this big thing that came out a few years ago where there's a subreddit called like Canadian housing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not sure of exactly what happened. I wasn't exactly a big follower. I'm not Canadian, but there was basically this big split where they ended up forming another subreddit called Canadian Housing 2 or something like that. And it's just people complaining about immigration and the impact of immigration on housing.
Yeah, I know that's a fact. I had a good Canadian friend a few years ago who told me about this, and this was 3 years ago at least. How in some parts of Canada, mainly big cities, of course, it is almost impossible to find housing.
Yeah,
and it's a direct result of mass immigration.
Yeah. Oh, I mean, the Canadian situation seems to be, I think, one of the worst in the West. But that's spilling out now into lots of other things. I saw a thread a little while ago on the UK, like there's like a UK health workers subreddit, and they were complaining about immigrant doctors in there, you know, and it's like any housing subreddit you go to for any given Western country, anywhere else, they'll all have threads talking and complaining about this stuff now. You know, it's hard to keep it in the box, really, even from within your own like Vanguard class that you've built out of highly educated, you know, young people. And seemingly this comes about in a week where Le Pen's party, which is admittedly a shadow of its former self, but they're now polling stronger than ever too. And I mean, some people are making a bit of fun out of me, or have done, because I voted Remain, famously. And like looking back, I think some of the reasons I voted Remain were probably quite silly. I wanted to keep at least to Eastern European immigration rather than having all brown and black people. But if you look at the continent, they all have brown and black people now. There's no real distinction now. But one of the other arguments I used to think about at the time was like, Britain was kind of like a node for subversion by the Yanks into Europe, and for better or worse, that's kind of been cut off.
Yes.
And now
True.
you're kind of getting, I mean, it's still very early days for a lot of those places, but you are kind of, and I'm not sure how much to what extent that was just inevitable anyway. But you are starting to see a lot of these movements rise up in various countries in Europe, and we just can't put anything together here. And I'm not sure if that's just purely a failure by us, or if that is just that I think it's largely more that the state apparatus we're operating against is more sophisticated and more capable of putting this sort of dissent down, because it's sort of more built in and closely related to the American model than anything that operates on the continent.
Yeah, the civil service in Britain is deeply embedded in the country, and of course has expanded enormously since World War II. And not just on a national level with like the national, what we traditionally call civil servants, but I mean all the many hundreds of thousands of people who work for councils of various levels, and the NHS, and all the rest of these basically government organizations. So yeah, it's true. And getting rid of those people is a bigger problem than getting rid of MPs, because those people are not elected at all. I mean, all right, Britain has got a non-elected prime minister, of course. I mean, Rishi Sunak was rejected twice, or was it 3 times, by so-called Conservative Party members as PM. He was certainly rejected twice, but somewhere in the back of my mind, I think it was 3 times.
I think he probably ran in a leadership election prior to that. But yeah, I suppose as a real front runner for victory, he was ejected twice, and then there was probably a previous one where he was a much smaller figure. And
they still parachuted him into the prime minister's job simply by making sure that the Conservative Party members never got a vote. And when you look at the people who they're talking about replacing him with now, because some people, even in the Conservative Party, are realizing the scale of the electoral disaster they face at the next election. I mean, you could conceivably see the Conservative Party reduced to less than double figures of MPs. I mean, I don't think it'll happen, but it could. But they're talking about the likes of Penny Mordaunt, for God's sake, as being that's the only white person I've seen suggested, and she's a big time globalist shill. So
I have £100 on Boris Johnson to come back and win them another election.
Whoa! Well, that's probably not a bad outsider bet.
Yeah, it's worth a lot on the return. I'm not saying I think. Yeah, I'm not saying I think it would happen.
Saying you like him,
or that I like him. Yeah, but I think it's a distinct possibility, and the return, because of the odds on such a bet, were pretty good. So.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a good outsider bet. I can see why you've done that. It's certainly possible.
The funny thing about the whole Sunak debacle, right, is that they literally, if you think back to like Cameron's A-listers, right, and what did they call those guys? The turnip Taliban, who were like opposing people like Liz Truss. They spent like what are we talking, like 19, 20 years at this point, basically decrying how the Tory base was like so racist that it had to be cleaned out. And then they stood a brown guy for a leadership election within the party twice, and then found that the base was actually indeed racist. And they acted surprised over this. These people are disgusting. They're just such a bunch of assholes.
Oh no, they're absolutely vile. I mean, that goes without saying. Person non grata in the chat is asking, how could Boris come back? Wouldn't he need to be an MP or a Lord first?
Well, he can be helicoptered in, can't he? The same as the A-listers were in the first place.
Put him in a by-election somewhere.
Did he actually officially lose his previous seat? He stepped down from the cabinet, didn't he? But
I don't know if I'm not sure. Is he still an MP? Because if
I'm
he's
pretty
still
sure.
an MP, it's very easy to bring him back.
Yeah. Oh no, he did leave the comments. Yeah, but yeah, he
Yeah, I
can
was
be
gonna
helicoptered
say.
back in.
But yeah, they can bring him in a by-election, and of course, it would not be difficult for the people who run the Conservative Party to get an MP to stand aside, shall we say, in order
I mean, he
to
goes
force a
on.
by-election.
He goes on GB News, doesn't he? So you could definitely say he's because I mean GB News, if you were going to apply that label containment to anyone, GB News is probably,
Yes.
I mean, GB News is a funny creature because it has these little like tendrils where like dissident energy can kind of operate within it and kind of escape the you know the capture velocity, I suppose you could say. But generally speaking, it is still like a tool for containing dissident energy or populist energy, I should probably say. And he's obviously on there a lot. Well, not a lot, but he goes on there. So he's kind of, you can still see that he's definitely within, this whole thing where he steps down and he gives up his job as an MP is kind of, it's kind of cope. He could, he's still within the system in some way. Yeah, his job is GB News is a Tory party media operation.
Yeah, which it is. I mean, as you say, there are a few outliers on GB News, and they sometimes say something which is a bit based, but not very often. And yeah, by and large, it is a containment thing.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm not a Johnson fan. I mean, merely him breaking the potential peace deal in Ukraine is enough for me to not like him. I mean, he's got hundreds of thousands of people killed in Ukraine, both Ukrainians and Russians. So that is enough for me not to like him. But yeah, you're quite right. I mean, he could come back, and if he did come back, unfortunately, there are enough foolish people who would still vote for him. I don't know. I'm not sure that even the Conservative Party, the people who actually run it, I'm not sure even they're sensible enough to do that, to be honest.
Well, this is kind of the funny thing about the whole thing. I remember saying on another stream a long time ago now, someone was saying, "Oh, you need to punish the Tory party," and I do agree with that. You do need to punish treachery, but the thing about the Tory party is it's almost like they don't care about losing, because they can operate and do everything that they need to do and want to do from an oppositional position. And because of where the money comes from into the party, that I don't think they can still be crushed as a party, but I think they actually don't believe they can. I think that they think because of where the money comes from that finances their party, that they can just operate purely in opposition. And they'll be fine. But the truth of the matter is all that donation money from housing developers and stuff like that will dry up very quickly if they haven't got enough seats to actually put down a meaningful opposition. So whereas I think because of the connections alone, it will just poodle along. So they almost don't care about losing, which is sort of makes it doubly worse.
I think that's true. Yeah. I do think they think even if they get badly beaten this time, and I'm not sure they really realize how hated they are in the country now. This defeat is going to be like epoch making. They're going to get the worst defeat certainly since the Second World War, like easily.
Yeah.
And I don't think they fully realize this at the moment.
Yeah.
Whether there'll be enough destroyed to actually change the party, I think that's a totally different matter.
Well, Sunny Jim in chat said, as an MP, he could declare himself, Boris, as a candidate in any constituency he likes, probably one he thinks he has the most chance of winning. Well, this is kind of the thing. If the party actually does decide that they don't want to just lose and that they actually do want a chance of winning, and they'll bring him back in, maybe just to stab him in the back later on, whatever, it's just going to be a case that they will literally just take any Tory stronghold with any MP in it who is like a small backbencher, and they'll just take them out and swap him in. The election's
Yes.
already been won. He'll just be the new MP for that area. They won't even have to have an election.
Yeah, and they would say to that person, we'll get you a seat at some stage in the future. So there'd be no issue with that. It's very easy for them to do. Jovo is asking you, what about Conservative councils and planning approvals and all this kind of stuff?
So, like, for example, where I am, funny enough, it's a bit weird where I am because we're a Labour stronghold for MPs, but we actually had a Tory council.
Mm-hmm.
And they were full on YIMBYs, just approving everything. And they were even going to the point where they wanted to bring in one of these limited movement policies, whereby they were going to like carve the town up into zones and have these ANPR cameras up.
Also, like 15-minute cities type thing.
Yeah, even though the city has no ring road, like if you have to commute across it, there's no way around it. And yeah, they did actually get voted out on that because of that. But the parties just kind of pivoted to other stuff that, like, inside it's sort of totally captured by Tory HQ. I can't speak for the rest of the country, but I know that this gentleman, Adam Clegg, on Twitter, he's actually recently switched to the Homeland Party, but I know he was pretty he operated quite a lot on a local level where he is, which is somewhere in or around Essex and East Anglia. I don't know where, and I'm not gonna pinpoint it anyway. And I know he said it was sort of a similar problem up there, which was that if the locals got anywhere near putting in a few candidates they liked, they would usually just helicopter a bunch of people in. The party's very sort of elitist on the inside, which is kind of ironic. And I imagine there's probably still quite a few constituencies where they're pretty good. I think they were pretty good round sort of like not Thanet way, but sort of Whitstable, Swalcliffe way along the coast there.
Oh yeah, no, I know
north
that
side
area.
of Kent.
I used to go on holiday there as a very small child.
Yeah, it's still quite nice in places.
Herne Bay and all around that sort of place, yeah.
Yeah, Herne Bay has kind of seen better days, but it's still a nice enough town to walk around or live in. And I know that they're I know that the Tory council were quite a bit better, but even then there was a particularly big thing which I think we talked about on this stream before, where they got a massive house building project turned down, and then Michael Gove sort of swooped in as the housing czar and just rubber stamped it anyway.
This is the same Michael Gove who was recently on television talking about how he's going to pick out groups like Patriotic Alternative, etc. Yeah,
basically made everyone an extremist overnight.
Yeah.
But I will say in Ashford, though, there's a Tory MP there and a Tory council. And I was quite hard on this guy. I used to describe him as just being an absolute creature. I still am. I don't like him. He's weak on so many things. But there's a large building contractor that operates in that area, which I won't name, but they're pretty terrible. In fact, I'll give people enough of a hint to look up who they are. I think they're in a little bit of financial trouble, and they're selling some of their sites to BP, who are then going to lease some of them back to them, because they do more than housing. They do other things in the area too. And they had one estate that they built, and they were basically told by the council it had to have certain amenities, which included, I think, a local shop and doctor's surgery. And they haven't built either of those things. And they were going to build another estate, and the council did hold them to say, no, you have to actually finish the previous housing development before you can build anything else in the city limits, in the town limits. So they've been a bit better on it. And that is, of course, a fast-growing town, so they do actually have to build some housing there. But yeah, it's not. The Tory councils are pretty weak, I think, at the moment.
Yeah, no, I don't know. To some degree, I'm looking at this from the outside, and it's a difficult situation. I think, to go back to what we were talking about earlier in terms of remigration and this kind of stuff, it's been done. I mean, what's it called? The other bit of the island that Haiti's on is just dumping truckload after truckload after truckload of Haitians back across the border.
The Dominican Republic.
The Dominican Republic, which is a much more reasonable place than Haiti is. And they're collecting, as I say, scores and scores of truckloads of Haitians and just dumping them back over the border into Haiti again. There's no sort of legal nonsense. The cops pick them up and take them back to Haiti again because, Dominican Republic doesn't really like Haiti very much.
Yeah.
The Americans did very much the same thing on a much larger scale prior to World War II.
Yeah.
Millions of Mexicans were simply sent back to Mexico.
Yeah.
And this was carried on. Also, FDR did it, and even Eisenhower did it when he was president in the 50s.
Yeah. But I mean, Jobbo pointed out in chat, Modi just flat out banned Muslims. I was going to call it something else then. Pakistan has ejected a sizable number of Afghans. Azerbaijan has just gone to the point of ejecting an enormous amount of, relative to their population, an enormous amount of Armenians. Yep. Just over the last 8 months or so. And, I actually obviously am against that because I happen to quite like Armenians and don't like Azerbaijanis for certain reasons. But there are tons of examples of this happening, logistically and otherwise. In fact, to be honest, the logistics is probably the easiest part of it. If you can acquire the power to do it,
at the end of World War I and in the 1920s, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of Greeks were removed from Turkey, for example, and to a much lesser extent, Turks were removed from Greek territory.
Yeah.
And of course, after World War II, millions of people were moved all around the chessboard of Europe. It's not at all unusual. It's happened, and it continues to happen. And there's no reason why it can't happen again. No reason at all.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, acquiring the power is the tough bit. Like, if you can get the power, it's not always legislative, but obviously the legislative power would be within the current system would be how you do it. Then it's actually a pretty easy thing to manage, and you can do it lots of different ways. You can be pretty forceful, or you can be pretty gentle.
Yeah, UK Migration Watch puts a thing on X on Twitter, which is just three points, 3 things the British government needs to do in order to get rid of all illegal immigrants straight away. And it is just 3 things. One of which is to get rid of the UN thing on human rights, which Britain can just withdraw from. Many countries have. Some countries have never signed up for it. And get out of the European Court, which again Britain can do, especially given we're not even in the EU anymore. Not a difficult thing to do that. It's like none of this is rocket science. But there's no will to do it in the parties or uni-party that runs Westminster.
Yeah.
I mean, this is really the problem. It's not that it's hard to do. It's the people who run it, so-called elites. And, Labour are conservatives. They're a uni-party, really. The differences between them are very minor.
Yeah.
And they're more minor now than they were 25 years ago.
Yeah. This is also the reason why, Nigel Farage calling for another referendum or this, that, and the other is all kind of pointless, because you can have as many referendums or votes as you like. If the people are still in there who have these interests, nothing will change. That these people need to go. You know, the clear them out meme is correct in that the elite need to be swapped out.
Yep, absolutely. But they're anti-British. I mean, even those of them who are still British, and many of them are not. Obviously, look at the British cabinet today. Look at a potential Labour cabinet. You know, these people, even if they are Anglo-Celtic British themselves, which hardly any of them are, but even those who are anti-Anglo-Celtic British, they just are, and it's so obvious now. It's comical.
Yeah.
And of course, you know, I've been watching this on Twitter, and people have been talking about all these, you know, the British, Scottish, Welsh, London, etc. leaders all being non-Anglo-Celtic people, and how that happened. And I mean, you know, Morgoth got it right when he said that the incentives are for everyone not to be called racist, and so the white guys just don't get put forward for any of these roles.
Yeah, there was some data that came out of America a little while ago that kind of said broadly the same thing, but on a corporate level, where they were showing that out of X number of jobs that have been created in the last year, only a minuscule amount had gone to sort of white people. But then, of course, someone else pointed out that over the same like period of time, X number of job losses had happened, and they had primarily affected white Americans. So you then ended up with this point where actually the net loss of jobs for that group of people was astronomical compared to, you know, jobs given to effectively outsiders. And these people are also selected and chosen for incompetence, though, you know, which is a big part of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely they are. I mean, you know, the Conservatives will, when it suits them, will turn around and say, oh, Labour has lists where only, you know, women or black people or whatever it might be can stand. But the Conservatives do exactly the same thing. They just don't call it that. But they make sure that the only candidate that is going to get elected there is a woman or a so-called BAME person. Which effectively has the same effects, basically. You know, it's just it's just so obvious. You look at it now, and it's like, yeah, well, if you're only going to put those people forward, then they're the only people who are going to get those jobs, aren't they? And as you say earlier, Alan, you know, everyone is, well, not everyone, but everyone in the mainstream political parties are just so, mustn't call me racist because that's a really bad thing. Whereas like the likes of you and I don't really give a shit about that anymore, because it's increasingly obvious that our enemies who are immigrants and what have you, they're quite happy to be racist.
Yeah.
And if we're not, then we're going to lose out, basically. You know, I've known this for years. I lived in Africa for 15 years. You can't live in Africa for 15 years and not realize that most Africans are extremely racist. Most Africans are even racist against other Africans if they're from a different tribe. You know?
Yeah.
It's just a fact. And you know, you look at the subcontinent, and you look at the Hindu Muslim split there, and you know, there's a fair amount of racism there. You know, it's like you look anywhere in East Asia, and East Asian people are extremely racist to each other. You know, the Japanese don't like the Chinese don't like the Japanese, Koreans don't like these people, and it's the same all over East Asia. And the only people who still stick to this rubbish about, oh, don't be racist, is white people, you know, because we're constantly told don't be racist, which is like childish. It's not the way humans are. I'm sorry, it's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've got a political prisoner in Britain sitting in jail at the moment, Sam Melia, who is in jail for making stickers like it's okay to be white. And they gave him 2 years in jail for doing that, even though that itself was not a crime. And the judge admitted it wasn't a crime, and yet still sent him to jail.
Well, he sent him there for incitement, didn't he? But the funny thing was, I remember when we were first talking about this case, and I said there are a few of the stickers that he made that are a bit more racy than some of the ones that people kept bringing up. But funny enough, when you go through and like read into the case, the one that the judge had a real problem with was the one that talked about whites being a minority in Britain by, or English, white British being a minority in Britain by 2060. 66 or whatever it is,
which is mere statistics and what's actually happening with the immigration rates.
Well, yeah, the funny thing is, I remember back in like the earlier in the 2010s, various bread tubers here on YouTube or just generally leftists banging on about that statistic and saying, oh, it's a trend, it's not going to happen, it's ridiculous. Of course, he actually underplayed those statistics massively.
Yes.
It's probably going to happen like for the British are sometime in the 50s, and here in England probably in the sort of late 30s, or sort of early 40s. But he that was the one that the judge, out of all the stickers, that was the one the judge seemed to have the biggest problem with. And it's like, why? He's saying, oh, it's because it's incitement. What is it inciting? Like the accepted narrative there that no one will. Yeah, the narrative there that everyone seems to accept, but no one will actually talk about, is that they know that this looks bad to the public, and simply mentioning it is inciting something bigger, which they won't go into.
Yeah, exactly. It's because, if people actually see these figures, they think, hang on, like I'm still going to be around then if they're a youngish person. Or my children are going to be around them for sure. Do I really want to live in this kind of country? Yeah.
There was actually a, funny enough, I'm just trying to look it up now because I have it on my computer somewhere. The Hope Not Hate, who actually that's probably something we should talk about as well.
We will.
The Hope Not Hate has released their latest State of Hate report, but a few years ago, if I can find it, a few years ago, they released some statistics that they'd done, some polling that they'd done. It's annoying because I can't find it at the moment, but they released some statistics that they'd done on they basically asked people various questions about that very line. You'll be a minority in your homeland by 2066. How do you feel about this? And the response was overwhelmingly negative by the public.
Yep.
So they kind of already know within these circles, and of course, they were the Hope Not Hate was saying it was bad that people felt this way, essentially, and that needed to be changed. The government had to do more to change that.
Do you reckon there's any chance that Hope Not Hate might try and do a survey like that in Israel?
No, never. Oh, I just found it actually. So it says, so what they asked was, they said, it has been suggested that white British people could be a minority in the UK by the 2060s due to current immigration patterns. That's actually not what that guy's paper that originally had that stat used. But it says, if this does happen, which of the two following words would best describe how that makes you feel? And like the total votes were like 35% uneasy. Bearing in mind they have to pick two, so the vote is split. 35% uneasy, 31% unhappy, 25% disappointed, and the only 1% though said pleased, and 7% said none of these.
One wonders what shade those people were.
Yeah. So. Yeah, generally speaking, and bearing in mind as well, you got like that is that they've split the vote. So there's essentially there's essentially three answers there that are negative, and people can pick any two answers. So,
Mhm.
of course, the total actual is considerably higher. But like, yeah, like this has never been a particularly popular position, and what you need to do is instead just get people talking about it, I suppose. But more importantly than that, of course, people do understand this and understand the issue here. We need to get people, inculcating this into some sort of party position somewhere that people can actually vote for. I will say that for all the talk about how reform doesn't have a chance, like half of my office, which I don't think are probably the best example of the general population, but half of my office who are in a Tory stronghold are talking about voting reform. So, and I'm not really sure if that's a good or a bad
I'm
thing, because I'm
torn.
not sure where that's going to go.
Adam, and you know about reform much better than I, because you've been involved with them to some degree. and I have two things about reform. On the one hand, I am very disappointed that they won't talk about ending mass legal immigration, which to me is the most urgent issue in British politics by a long way. On the other hand, of course, we are going to get the usual thing we get of the Conservatives saying, "Oh, if you vote for reform, you're just laying in Labour." So you're more informed than I am about this. I mean, what's your view about
that? I mean, Reform's a deeply frustrating party because they seem to actually be going for a win, which is counter to Farage's previous strategies. If this would run the Farage way, which, I mean, Farage is technically still in charge of this party, even though he's not the leader. But the old school Farage strategy would be talk about the issue, win on said issue, or win seats set on said issue, and the other parties will have to accommodate more of your position to win back that base of support that they've lost. There are opportunities here that have been wasted. I found, I remember we talked on this very stream a while back. I think Royal Oak was around and on these streams occasionally back then. And we talked about the red wall back in the after the 2019 election. And it can't have been that long ago. Well, anyway, there was an election that happened. And we talked about the loss of the red wall, and of course, admittedly, a lot of those parts were like Labour voting areas, but it was never so solidly Labour that they could really call it something like the red wall. Some of those seats did flip a lot over the years, and this sort of memeing of them having this sort of sense of ownership over it was an opportunity, I suppose, to inculcate more. You could say working class friendly or right signalled positions back into the party, but for various reasons it didn't happen. But Reform don't seem to be taking this strategy of like trying to drag parties to your position. They instead seem to be going down this road of actually going for or at least kind of pretending like they're going for wins, even though within the party they don't think they have a chance. I mean, they said they were going to run someone everywhere, but I mean, I've already been told by email by reasonably high up members within the party that they won't be running anyone in my area because
I worried a bit.
They can't win.
I worried a bit, and I don't know if you saw the academic agent stream that Dan was on. And Dan apparently was asked at one stage to be a Reform candidate.
Yeah.
And then they found some fairly milquetoast tweet he did a few years ago and cancelled the idea.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, this is kind of what I was saying earlier when I said about how they're still kind of stuck in this old paradigm of like worrying about being called racist or worrying about regime acceptance, which they are never going to win anyway.
Yep.
They'll go through and they'll, as he said, they'll go through and they'll check the social media backgrounds of various people before they let them run. Yet, despite that, they'll let some guy in, right? They'll do that to like not allow a guy that talks about deportations in, but they'll let some guy in who's had like very, very like horrendous sort of pseudo sexual relations, or at least by text message with an underage woman, like an underage girl, like what? This is
Well, that's
this
much
is
more
bizarre.
acceptable. Adam, come on, that's much more acceptable in Westminster than actually preserving Britain as an Anglo-Catholic country.
Yeah, like Reform are probably more tied into the regime machine than they probably realise or care to admit, like based on that alone.
I mean, I honestly think you could be a gay pedophile and probably be more acceptable to Westminster than actually trying to keep Britain an Anglo-Catholic country, which it should be and has been for the last 1,500 years. But I mean, it's like,
yeah.
I mean, I'm laughing, but if you don't, you cry. It's I don't know. My view is that if Farage comes back, and he shows no sign of doing so, but if he did, and actually ran for a seat where he had a good chance of winning, he'd win easily. And Reform would get some MPs.
Well, you say that, but he's never managed to win a seat, though, has he? The thing is, wherever he runs, they will pull enormous amount of resources into keeping him out, which was how he I mean, maybe I'm defending him too much here, but he kind of trolled them in the whole South Thanet, elections all those years ago, where he basically made, Labour and Tories. There was literally, photos of Labour and Tory campaigners walking, almost hand in hand.
Yeah, they would absolutely combine in order to defeat him. I know you're right about that, but I don't know. I mean, I still haven't really forgiven Farage for abandoning UKIP and suggesting who he did suggest as the replacement for himself. I don't know. He seems happier going to interview Trump and stuff like that than he getting involved in British politics.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, he's technically still the chairman of that party. He could, I mean, it should already be following the Farage's model. So whatever it's doing now is kind of whatever that has morphed into. And it's a little disappointing. Although, like Ash and Duke said in the chat, he'd vote for them. Yeah, like I get it. I mean, I can't vote for them because they won't run in my area. I don't begrudge anyone voting for them. But they're also not. The thing is, at the end of the day, like, there's something to be said for sometimes bowing out of protest. But as well, a vote is free. If there's a means by which you can hurt the uni party or the regime, and it's don't show up and vote, or even show up and vote for one of these off-centre parties. I remember back when people were voting UKIP quite strongly, and a lot of these boomers were always coming up with these defences for why voting for UKIP wasn't a protest vote. And it's like, well, what's wrong with a protest vote? Yep. It's just, by their system, it's just as legitimate as any other vote. I won't be voting for them just because they won't run in my area. If they did, I'd probably consider it. If any other party other than the Lib Dems, Labour, or the Conservatives voted in my area, I'd consider it. If George Galloway ran in my area, I'd consider it.
I'm the same. My view is if you are right of centre, I mean genuinely right of centre, not so-called conservative, or you used to be a supporter of the Conservatives, you've basically got to avoid the Labour so-called conservative uni party, and the Lib Dems and the Greens are part of that party. They're all the same. All of those guys are the same. So vote for anyone else except them. That's my view. I'd almost sooner vote for the commies, to be honest, than vote for any of them. We talk about the Russians have got an election coming up, and Mitch is not with us, so Mitch has got an invite to the stream, so if he wants to come on, he can. But Mitch is not with us, so we can't really talk about the Russian election. But I've seen people on Twitter, X, etc., talking about Putin and how it's not really democracy and all the rest of it. I mean, my answer to that is, there are many Americans I know who are deeply suspicious about senile Biden being the most popular president in US history. and the shenanigans that went on in 2020. And as we were talking earlier, I mean, Sunak was rejected several times, even by members of the so-called Conservative Party, to be British Prime Minister, and yet there he is, parachuted in with no vote whatsoever as Prime Minister. And so I'm not sure, I mean, I am not quite so sensitive about what these mostly globalists and neocons call our democracy. I'm not quite as sensitive about it as many people seem to be, because I don't think it's real. I think it's largely an illusion.
It's managed democracy, comrade.
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, at least, you know what? I look at Putin and I see a man who is pro-Russian. When I look at Joe Biden or Rishi Sunak, I most certainly do not see men who are pro real stock Americans or Anglo-Celtic Brits. Not at all. And I could say the same thing in Australia, by the way, with Albanese. He doesn't strike me as being pro-white Australians at all. So, yeah. What room do we have to throw stones at Putin? I'm not quite sure, really. Who would you soon have leading your country? If there was someone came along like Putin, but who was pro-Anglo-Celtic Brits, he would certainly have my support.
I mean, this is the thing. If our democracy worked like the Russian one, I'm not sure if I particularly like it, but at the very least, because the leader ends up ruling a bit more like a king, it kind of creates more long-term thinking. Like, you could put Keir Starmer in that position, and he would actually, I mean, I don't think anyone here is going to like Keir Starmer, but he would become a more favourable politician just by existing within such a system.
Because it's not just the next 5 years. Yeah, absolutely true. I see what you.
Yeah, he isn't just having photos of himself taken where he's just like standing near to the helm. He's actually at the helm, and that's going to substantially change the way that he operates within that system.
Yeah, no, I didn't disagree with that. But yeah. But I'm not a Democrat. I don't think I don't think many of us on the right are Democrats these days. I don't think it benefits the indigenous people of the country.
Yeah.
And I see these people, and that many of them are immigrants, of course, but some of them are shit-lips, white shit-lips. You will turn around and say, "Oh, Britain's a nation of immigrants." Yeah, bullshit. I'm sorry, it's not. The Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes, etc., came across. Started to come across in the late Roman era, for God's sake. But if you go to a country like New Zealand, the Maori who arrived, I don't know, 1500s. In New Zealand, depends who you speak on, who you speak to. They're regarded as indigenous. Yeah. And the Anglo-Saxons have been in Britain at least twice as long as that.
Yeah. And that's just the latest group that that homogenized into the already native population.
Yeah, absolutely.
Some of the groups go back, like 5,000 plus years. I mean that Thomas Rousel, survived the jive. Yeah. He got in a bit of
I was just going to say the same thing, Adam.
Yeah, and he was bringing up a study that they'd made whereby he was saying, well, Rome, like the early Roman Republic, was built by Rome or Italian natives, and sort of the later Roman Empire was occupied by immigrants, and they came up with all these excuses, and it's like, if he'd instead just come out and said, Rome as a republic might have been born with native Romans, but it was built into an empire by immigrants. That's technically the same argument. just with some celebration parallax thrown in, and those same people suddenly wouldn't have had a problem with it. But you had like, you know, the West Meds or the East Meds, sorry, like Nassim Taleb, who I used to be quite a fan of. I've got books of his on my shelf, and coming out and getting the arse over this, and all these various other figures. And this guy, what's his name? Is it Tom Booths? Banging on, crying about, oh, the politicization of history, when this guy's entire body of work is decrying the use of the term Anglo-Saxon, and saying about how we should use history with you know, with Brexit looming on the horizon. You know, it's these people are obscene.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with what you're saying there at all. I mean, just Simple Pirate in the chat is saying Putin's not Anglo-ethnic Russian. I see no evidence of that. He's also saying he's a rich ex-KGB guy who only cares about himself. Well, he's a rich ex-KGB lawyer. And
yeah, don't make him sound harder than he is.
Yeah, he was a KGB lawyer. You know, he wasn't some kind of super spy. And also, you know, Rishi Sunak is a globalist Indian banker. I mean, who do you think is? Do you reckon Putin's more pro-Russian than Rishi Sunak is pro-Anglo-Celtic Brit? Because I know who I'd put my money on, and it wouldn't be Rishi Sunak, who will, after he stops being prime minister, will go to some banking job, more than likely in the USA or somewhere else around the world, not in UK. You know, his wife is is the daughter of one of the richest men in India, not in Britain.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Jobu says, were you a fan of Taleb during your Remainer phase? Yes, indeed I was. I don't know what Taleb's position on Brexit was, though.
Probably anti.
Yeah, probably. Most definitely.
So, no, look, these people use history all the time. And Tom Rouse, Survive the Jive, who has an excellent YouTube channel, by the way, is a good example. He looks at this stuff quite often. And, you know, there's a lot of Stone Age genetics still in the British people. There's a lot of Celtic genetics still in the British people. And the other thing, of course, which is not talked about, is that, you know, the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes and the Danes and even the Normans and the Huguenots, the French Protestant Huguenots, were all very, very closely related Northwest European people. All of them, very closely related. Not like the immigration into Britain now, which includes people who have nothing whatsoever in common with Anglo-Celtic British people. This is just fact, you know.
Mm. And it's like, yeah, like to like the thing is that Russia is. I mean, we've made this point before, but like, I think Britain locks up like 4 times as many people for hate speech crimes as Russia does. Russia still locks people up for things they say, which is you know, less than ideal. And you know, and it's like I think Mitch, when he's been on the channel before as well, has talked about like the problems where like, I remember was this footage that came out of Tucker Carlson going over there, or was it different, where they were going around and they were filming like the streets in St. Petersburg or Moscow, and they were like significantly whiter. But of course, you know, Mitch has pointed out when he's been on here previously, and I think other people have as well, that they still have problems with, like, you know, gangs from the more, you could say, Asiatic areas of the Russian Federation and various other migrant groups in those cities. It's just they're not as far along as here. So, you know, it's not. I don't think it's so much that it's based Russia, but it is the case that for a variety of reasons, their political system is partly because they're also just, you know, a geopolitical enemy of America. It kind of in some ways has a a holdout from some of these policies to a certain extent that is slightly more favourable than our own. North Sea said it's 10 times more than 4 times. I thought it was 10 times as well, but I didn't want to massively overshoot it. But if he says so, I'll take it.
In terms of people locked up in Russia compared to Britain, are you talking about?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah. No, we have far more people locked up, and you can be locked up in Britain for something far more milk toast than they will lock you up in Russia for.
Yeah.
There's less free speech in Britain than there is in Russia. I think that is fair to say now. I don't think that's necessarily true in America because they do have amendments and so on. But it is certainly true in Britain that you could be locked up. I mean, look at St. Amelia. You could put stickers up that say it's okay to be white and get 2 years in jail for that. Now, if you went around Russia putting up stickers saying, I don't know, Putin's an arsehole, I very much doubt you'd get locked up, quite frankly. Very much doubt.
I mean, some people do get locked up for things along those lines, but it's definitely not, for the same extent here. I mean, I said locked up. I think it's the difference. The disparity is actually in arrests, whereas here, like I suppose in Russia, there are some instances where they will actually lock you up. As here, where we're a bit more of a therapeutic state, you'll just get some lecturing judge that instead impose a fine in which you can't actually not pay, that they'll just take it straight out of your bank account, straight out of your wage from your wagey job. They don't even give you the option to martyr yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, Aubrey in the chat saying Putin is worth $200 billion. I don't know if that's true, but maybe he is. How much could that improve the lives of the Russian people? Well, Aubrey, I would ask you, how much money is the Biden family worth, including from his son and his nefarious operations in Ukraine? And how much could that improve the lives of the American people? How much is Rishi Sunak, the extremely wealthy Indian banker who runs Britain, how much is he worth, and how much could that improve the lives of the British people?
But is that actually money that Putin's got? I know he's quite a notorious art collector. I don't know if anyone has any real solid valuation on what his art collection's worth, though. Do we know any estimates?
But I do know that, you're not going to find many world leaders who are not extremely wealthy, are you?
I mean, but the problem with this though is I remember people used to have this weird thing for raging about McDonald's, and they used to say that if the McDonald's board of directors were gone, the wages, the workers could get paid more. But when you actually take all those salaries into consideration and you split it across just North America, it's a fraction of what their wages go up every year by anyway, and it's only a one-off increase. And then you lose. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and defend board directors, but you then lose the direction that a proper managerial structure can give a company.
It's not a good argument.
No, like generally speaking, any sort of ruling class, when you wilt that wealth down, it doesn't go that far, really. The problem that we've seen as well, because we see this directly in the West now, the problem isn't so much that the problem isn't so much that there's a lot of people collecting wealth through bare corruption. It's more that the ways in which that wealth is collected for these various classes is contradictory to generating wealth within the society at large. And as well, it's contradictory to the things that are not associated with generating wealth, like building community or things like that. So Alone in the Woods said that's because McDonald's is such an obvious symbol of America. Well, it wasn't. The thing is that when this was happening, it wasn't really sort of anti-Americans that were talking about this. It just seemed to be that whenever they wanted to bring up examples of, wiping out managerial structures, it was always McDonald's that got used. It just seemed a bit weird. There's probably better companies to use as an example of that. Yeah, they never go after the banks. Funny enough, they love to talk about the bankers, the bonuses, but they often don't actually name specific banks or talk about specific bankers. It's kind of like an ethereal enemy. it is weird how that works. How history can be viewed as a battle between big finance and big manufacturing, and big finance definitely won that one.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, in the West, certainly. I mean, look at Britain. Good example. Used to be the workshop of the world, and gradually our manufacturing totally destroyed it. I was watching Apostolic Majesty's stream that he did on that American guy's channel earlier today. I don't know if you saw it, Adam, and I did put it up in the Discord. Quite an interesting stream. It's about The Unnecessary War, the book that I think you came on at least one of those streams. That
the Patrick Buchanan one.
Yes, yeah, it's about that, and also about Stalin's victory in World War II. And I haven't watched all of it yet because it was very early in the morning and I was getting ready for this stream. But I watched the first part, which was mainly Buchanan's Unnecessary War. And like Apostolic Majesty has a very good understanding of Britain and history in that period, and one that I very largely agree with. He's talking about this stuff, and he mentions the fact that leading up to World War I, one of the rivalries was the Germans building a navy, of course. And of course, the Royal Navy and the British shipbuilders and what have you, we outbuilt the Germans prior to World War I. And in fact, by 1912, the Germans had admitted, look, we can't build a navy as big as the British. Can't do it. British can build 2 ships for every one we build. And it's ironic because people will tell you that, by the First World War, Germany and America had overtaken Britain in steel production and 1 or 2 other things, But what they won't tell you is they hadn't overtaken Britain in shipbuilding. How efficiently and quickly we could do it. What destroyed that for Britain was the Washington Naval Treaty in the 1920s, which they also talk about a bit in that stream. Because the Washington Naval Treaty allowed Britain to build 2 battleships, Nelson and Rodney, with 16-inch guns, because the Americans and Japanese already had ships with 16-inch guns, and the British didn't at that stage. But apart from that, Britain didn't build another battleship until the late 1930s because of the Washington Naval Treaty. And of course, what that did was, and we built also far fewer cruisers and other warships than we normally would have done. Britain used to build anywhere between 2 to 6 capital ships every year, and had done so going back into the 1860s. And as soon as you bring in something like the Washington Naval Treaty, where there's a battleship holiday and no one's allowed to build battleships, what happens is all your British shipyards, not all of them, but a lot of them close down. They lose workforces and become less efficient. And we can see a much more recent example than this. At the time of the Falklands War, Britain had about 12 or 15 nuclear hunter-killer submarines, as well as the 4 boomer boats, the boats with the nuclear missiles on board. Yeah. These days, we only have 6 hunter-killer nuclear missile subs, and eventually we'll have 7, we're told. But the thing is, when you don't build enough, you lose shipyards, and above all, you lose the skilled workers and managers who run these things. So that when you do want to build these things, it's much more expensive and it takes far longer. And of course, Britain in World War II wasn't able to build capital ships as quickly as we wanted, although Winston Churchill made that worse by actually stopping all work on British carriers and battleships at the start of World War II to build escorts, which we didn't need. The Admiralty was already building extra escorts. But the fiction is that Churchill saved us. There's so many fictions, But yeah, the one of the British industries that was destroyed was the warship building industry, and it was destroyed by the Washington Naval Treaty.
Yeah.
You know, not until then, in 1918 and 1919, Britain still had a warship building industry that could outbuild America at that time. And America, in order to have overtaken Britain in the natural way of competition, would have had to have spent a fortune, which she was very unlikely to have spent, to be honest, because she didn't need to.
Yeah.
But of course, if you can get a treaty that means, the Brits are voluntarily going to get rid of that, which they did, and you can argue why that happened, and the influence, the bad influence that Churchill had on that, as with so many other things. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, and you see this point after World War II when America wants to get these allies in Asia, suddenly like all the shipbuilding like disappears, dries up, and all goes east.
Mm-hmm.
When it wasn't particularly cheaper to make anything over there. Someone.
Oh yeah, I mean, look, all manufacturing has basically been, well, not all manufacturing, but a lot of manufacturing in the West, and most manufacturing in Britain has long ago left the country. It's also pretty bad in America, but they've retained a lot more than we have. And the latest people who are suffering with this is, of course, Germany, who's having their manufacturing industry destroyed to a large degree as a result of the Ukraine war and the Americans blowing up the Nord Stream pipeline.
Yeah. Yeah, Victor Caleros says, when did Britain build her first aircraft carriers? Wasn't that, it was actually quite early, wasn't it? It was during World War One.
Yeah, Britain was the first country to build aircraft carriers. The first designed from the bottom up aircraft carrier launched was HMS Hermes in 23 or 24, I think. And before that, we'd had conversions. But yeah, Britain was the pioneering country in aircraft carriers.
Yeah. Fran says, thoughts on the new Dune and if Zendaya is mid. I have not seen the new Dune, and I'm worried to watch it because I'm such a big fan of the books.
Yeah, I haven't seen it yet either. I will watch it when I can do so without paying to see it, which won't be long. I've heard some bad things about it from people who like Dune. I know there's a review from Morgoth, and who did it with him? Adam, do you remember?
No, I wanted to go watch it before I watched the review that he did.
Yeah, I know. Okay, because there's not a lot of spoilers in it. There are some. Yeah, he did. Morgoth did a review on it like last week, I think, and I can't remember who it was with now. Was it Jay Burden, or I think it was an American? Oh, Oren McIntyre says friends in the chat, which is probably correct.
I mean, people are saying Zendaya is clearly mid. People are saying Zendaya is clearly mid. Zendaya is. I mean, even that's pushing it a bit. Sub mid, probably. Although, as suave ethnics go, there are some pictures of her more done up, and I suppose she's more passable there. But
I know that Tolkien didn't like Dune.
No, yeah, I sure remember someone saying that.
And he was quite public about he didn't like Dune, and also explained why he didn't like it. So I do think it's a bit 60s in some respects.
Yeah, it is a bit. I think it's a hard thing to bring to the big screen without making it very 60s, but I suppose there's an interpretation of it in there that kind of goes beyond that.
But what Morgoth was saying, and I don't know about this, but what Morgoth was saying is that he thought there were themes in Dune that modern Hollywood can't really explore. And that was his real critique of the Dune 2 movie. Sorry, Mitch, you were going to say something, mate. I beg your pardon.
Did you want me to talk about the Russian election briefly?
Once we finish talking about Dune, for sure. Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to say about Dune?
I hear on one moment, like from more moderate types that I engage with on Twitter, that it's not that bad, like it's actually quite good. Then I'm hearing from people more along my spectrum going, yeah, it's absolutely crap. Don't waste your time watching it.
That's exactly what I'm hearing. Yeah, that's what I'm hearing.
So, but then again, I can't have a go at people for watching crap material when I watched because Critical Drinker did some video about some film called Damsel, which I don't know why I watched it. I hated that film.
That looks terrible.
Yeah. Sorry, it's not really very believable that a 5'2" woman who weighs like 40 kilos is able to go around the fucking North Pole chopping wood, or that she can somehow, or that she can do SAS level, like levels of maneuvers on one in the middle of a cave system, escaping from a bloody dragon.
Yeah, I mean, constant these days in Western movies is little chicks beating up women. It's just ridiculous. Sorry, little chicks beating up men. It's just ridiculous.
Or in this case, managing to escape from a dragon, then befriend it, and watch while said dragon commits pretty much war crimes in an entire kingdom, because said kingdom were sacrificing her to the dragon, who for some reason is subdued by her when a group of knights who went up against the dragon all got burned to a crisp. But one little girl who's, as I said, 5'2" and weighs around 40 to 45 kilo is able to subdue said dragon.
Power of feminism.
Yeah, no, it's like what. But there ought to be some sort of special word in the English language just to describe that sort of crap. Like, German probably has a special word for crap like that, but I don't think we have one.
I just call it feminist bullshit, which is like most Hollywood movies.
Yeah, but that's 2 words. Like, it's like you think at this point.
No.
So it's like I don't know. I mean,
Atman, did you have anything else you wanted to say about Dune?
No. I mean, I haven't seen it. I probably should go see it. Someone said, Ash and Duke said, I won't watch it. Don't let woke Hollywood ruin the images you cast into your mind while reading the literature. Yeah, that's kind of, but they already kind of have with the first film. I mean, the first film also, I didn't like it. It was probably the best we'll ever get to a Dune big screen adaptation, but I still didn't like it. It had some issues. I just don't like, what was this guy's name? This little French Jewish guy, Timothy Chalamet. Yeah, I really didn't like him as young Paul. I didn't like.
They're trying to breed him as some sort of like, I don't know, closest thing, like because like David. I mean, you had Brad Pitt around the time of Troy, who was like a sex symbol at that time. They're trying to do the same now with Timothy Chalamet, and it's just like. I just don't see anything inspiring about him. And in fact, like, every single one of his characters is just more pathetic. Like he manages to butcher Henry V because the screenwriter of that film was particularly crap. So it's just...
I've never read the book, you see, so I'm not as invested in it as some people. But what are the books, I should say. But what I do agree with what Mitch said earlier. There are centrists I know who are praising this movie big time, but those people who are actually more in my political position, which to say more on the actual right, most of them don't like it as far as I can see.
Well, I mean, Villeneuve is really great with his visuals and his cinematography. That was good from the first film, and I imagine it will be pretty amazing in this one too. But and I suppose for some people that's enough to have a good visualization of basic events from a previously better written story put onto the screen. But I don't know. I will go and watch the second one, even though it'll be under protest. But I will watch it just so I can make sense of what the fuck everyone's talking about when they're complaining about it on Twitter.
Yeah, I'm the same. I'll watch it, but I'm just not going to give them money to go and watch it. But
Yeah, I'm just gonna wait for it to come up on something like Movies Joy or wherever, one of those websites, and then just watch it there. I'm not gonna pay a penny to a cinema or whatever. So the only film I've been interested in lately is Oppenheimer. That's the only one in my past 5 years I can actually say, I'd go to a cinema for that. Aside from that, it's just a penetrating sea of foaming shit that passes for Hollywood these days.
I'll be honest with you, Mitch. I have tried to watch Oppenheimer. I'm not sure if it's twice or 3 times now. And I've so far only got an hour into it, and I've just given up. It's so boring.
I mean,
I'm not saying the story it's telling is boring, but the film to me is boring because of the way it's filmed. And I'm not a total Nolan fan. Like I really like some Nolan films, and others I don't like at all. Like I don't like Dunkirk, for example. I think it's a terrible film.
Well, I mean, it's like with the case of Oppenheimer, it's like because Nolan does this way. It's like non-linear, so you have to watch it a few times fully to understand. Like, because I mean, one scene he'll do it where it's based in 1920s or whatever in a Dutch university. Next thing you know, it's actually at Los Alamos again, and it's like your brain's trying to fumble between those two. Secondly, I mean, there's a few.
Yeah, I can't hear you.
Kitty.
You're back.
Some woman called Kitty who he was having an affair with. Well, it wasn't really a affair because it was before he met his wife, but yeah. And it was just like, there's like this sort of really just over the top sexual scene where it's like, it shows him and her mid coitus while he's testifying at some judicial inquiry in front of his wife or whatever, and it's just like, just over the top.
Yeah,
it's just you really do think about. I mean, I can understand that if Harvey Weinstein was still a massive factor in Hollywood, but he's not. So you can just imagine he is a tip of the iceberg in terms of a sexual perversion you've got at that place.
Yeah, look, I'm sure that's true, but as I say, look, with that director, I mean, I really liked Inception. I thought it was a good film. Didn't like Dunkirk at all, and as I say, I've tried to watch Oppenheimer. I'm not sure if it's 2 or 3 times now, and I've just given up because I just lost interest in it. Because you understand, I understand the basic story, the historical story, and I'm just not interested enough in this.
Well, one of my critiques, one of my critiques there was that he just sugarcoated how connected to all the communist groups that Oppenheimer really was, and he just tried to.
Sure, that's true.
Yes, I mean, on one hand, he did characterize him. I don't know best to phrase it, but because you have Oppenheimer, who, when he was creating a bomb, he was all enthusiastic, all gung-ho for using it. When it actually gets used, however, on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, all of a sudden he grows his moral conscience and he just becomes unbearable as a character. I think that's what he was like historically as well, where he's all gung-ho when he's actually creating a bomb. When it actually gets used by Truman, he turns into some sobbing wreck that just becomes unbearable to deal with.
One wonders.
President Truman, I thought I was making a rice cooker.
Would he have heard it used on Germany? One wonders, but yeah. But
that is kind of the implication, though, isn't it? That he was fine with using it on Germans.
I wondered that myself. I did, to be honest.
But you say you didn't like Dunkirk?
No, I didn't like it at all. I thought it got the actual story really wrong. too much RAF, not enough Royal Navy, basically.
Yeah, that's probably fair. I mean, there's some bits about it I quite liked, and there's some bits about it I really didn't like. But he really plays up the founding myth of like the small boats.
Yeah, again, the Royal Navy evacuated the British Army, not those small boats. The job of the small boats was to pick guys up off the beach and ferry them out to Royal Navy destroyers, basically, and like ferries and stuff who the Royal Navy had commandeered. Without the Royal Navy, the British Army would have all been captured. It just would have been. And when the soldiers got back to the UK, they were beating up guys in RAF uniforms because they never saw the RAF. Now, this was unfair because the RAF was actually fighting, but they were trying to engage the German bombers before they got to the beach.
Yeah, they were off
soldiers.
Yeah,
the soldiers didn't always see them, or did very seldom saw them. So when they got home, they thought that the RAF had just let them be bombed to shit. And of course, loads of Royal Navy ships were sunk by the Luftwaffe as well. You had to be a pretty brave dude to be a sailor on one of those RN ships, or on one of the small boats, or on the bigger ferries and stuff that the RN had requisitioned and put their own sailors and officers on. When the expeditionary force got home, they were beating up anyone they found in an RAF uniform, and they actually had to put out propaganda stuff on the radio and in film saying, "Oh no, the RAF were fighting, you just didn't see them," which is true, they were, but I thought if I was going to recommend a film about Dunkirk, it would be the 1960 movie about Dunkirk, which is actually a much more accurate portrayal of what went on than that film. And actually had a lot of extras. There were great big vast numbers of people on the beach, and of course, because it was made in 1960, they're not CGI extras; they're real extras. Whereas this movie doesn't use CGI because the director doesn't like to use it, but he also didn't.
Which is fair enough, but the numbers look a bit thin on the beach. It looks a bit.
They really do. Yeah. Given this is supposed to be, the whole British expeditionary force of over 100,000 men, plus a lot of French guys too, by the way. But,
well, that's the other thing that the film did that I didn't like. It kind of does this whole, shitting on the British that they got to leave and the French had to stay. It's like, well, first off, it is France.
Yep.
And secondly, that isn't exactly how it happened. Like, they did pull out tons of Belgian and French soldiers too. Like,
yes, they did, and those guys then had the option later on of staying in Britain and fighting, or of going back to bits of France and Belgium. Bits of France, beg your pardon, that were not occupied. Because most of southern France wasn't occupied by the Germans until 1943. So Vichy and all that stuff.
Did we want to talk about this Russian election then?
Yeah, I was just going to say France for a while there was almost a German ally in terms of Vichy, but
Vichy. I mean, Vichy France is a whole other interesting conversation in its own right.
And not as bad as people sometimes pretend it was as well, but whatever.
And the alliance wasn't really as they weren't quite the vassal state that a lot of people make out, although they weren't exactly a fully independent power either.
No,
I think there's obviously I don't want to jump into any sort of mid-century German simping. I think there's a lot about them that are very cringe, but their treatment of Vichy as an ally for a long time was pretty good. As a sort of
until 1943. Until 1943, more than half of France was still run by the French.
Yeah.
And the French resistance was very largely communist.
Yeah, and it was tiny as well. Like I can't remember what it was, but I remember reading might be a Max Hastings book actually, so not a bit pop history, but he was covering like memoirs of pilots who were downed, and they struggled for a long time before they could even find the French resistance. And then as soon as the Allies rolled through, everyone and their mum had been a member of the French resistance, apparently.
Yeah, that was what my grandfather said, who went across on D+3 to Normandy. He absolutely said that when he came home on leave. He said, yeah, everyone was in the French resistance after the Allies arrived.
Yeah.
Which was very true. And those people who were in the French resistance, to be honest, were mostly communists. Not every single one of them, but most of them.
Yeah.
But yeah, all right, let's talk about this Russian election because Mitch has joined us. So, Mitch, what's your thoughts on the election?
Well, I mean, you've got 4 main candidates, only one of whom is actually any real opposition. Because the main topic, of course, will be the war in Ukraine. 3 of them, like you got Putin, the communist candidate called Kharitonov, and the nationalist candidate Leonid Slutsky of the LDPR. Their entire gist is how more efficiently can we kill the Ukrainians, while the 4th one is a guy called Davankov, who's essentially just a peace bro. Like, we just want peace and the sanctions to stop, essentially. So, and the thing is, like, Davankov is seen as quote unquote liberal, but liberal in context of Russia just means pro-Western. So Davankov, he's not socially liberal at all. Like, he's against all the so, for example, he made gender transition illegal in his area. He also doesn't like mass immigration. He doesn't like using Central Asians as cheap labor. So he's a lot more conservative than the CIA would want him to be, if indeed the CIA were connected to him. The only other thing is, you got plenty of these, mainly women, who are practically getting scammed by the Ukrainian SBU to just cause a stunt in their local voting booths, just like, put ink all over ballot machines or whatever, and so on, which just creates more of a nuisance rather than anything actually damning, to be honest. And it's just a small. It's mainly women. That's one thing that's to be noted. I don't know why it is.
What a surprise!
Yeah, just women.
It's always women, mate. I mean, look at some of the stupidest things that happen in America and Britain, and who votes for them? It's women. I mean,
Yeah. So, I mean, the only interesting thing about this election is how many votes will Davankov get, because that will be interpreted as, okay, this is how many Russian people out there actually want peace. Now they're tired of a war in Ukraine. But like, but that's the thing, like, the other 3 candidates are just gung-ho about the war in Ukraine. Like, the communists are very gung-ho about just like going all the way to Lvov because they see it as denazification crusade. The nationalists under Slutsky, they want all of Novorossiya liberated and for Ukraine just to be absolutely smashed. I mean, you've got Putin, who, well, Putin's Putin. I don't have to say much about what Putin thinks about the war. And it's like, yeah, I don't really know what more to say about the election other than that.
I'm just thinking if this was a British war and we lost an equivalent number of people, and Russia, I believe, has lost a lot less people than Ukraine in the war, but obviously they've still lost a significant number. I think they're now at the stage where the Putin and the Russian government has to win a victory now. You can't have all. I mean, Western nations can fight 20-year wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and lose much smaller numbers of people because we were fighting a war against guys who were not an organized army. let alone an organized army supplied by all of NATO. But we still lost, hundreds in Britain's case and thousands in America's case, meant for absolutely nothing. And then we just ran away in a shambolic fashion from Afghanistan, for example. Western countries can do that. I think Russia's lost enough men because they've been fighting a very well-equipped Western supplied and trained army. At this stage, Putin and the Russian government have to win that war in in Ukraine. But they have to. What they have to do to win it remains open. I mean, my own view is that they're probably got to take up to the Dnieper River, and probably Odessa as well. And if they do that, I think Putin can sell that to the Russians as a victory. If the breakaway pro-Russian republics in the east of Ukraine are beyond the range of Ukrainian artillery, because a lot of people in the West don't realize that the Ukraine has been shelling these seas and killing Russian women and children in these seas since 2014, and the only way they will stop doing that is if it's beyond the range of their artillery, basically. So I don't know. That's my view.
Well, that's the problem, though, isn't it? Like, the Russian advance is quite slow. That's the nature of a war, unfortunately. But it's going to be a long time before the war actually ends. Because
I don't know. I think it's been speeding up over the last 6 months. I don't know about you.
Since Avdiivka has fallen, though, the fighting's largely just, past week and a half, it's largely just stalemated a lot more. It's just become a lot more grindy again, rather than fast advances, like immediate aftermath of Avdiivka. The only other thing is, the Ukrainians think it's a good idea to send their Free Legion of Russia over the border, quote unquote, as a stunt. However, they were geolocated to actually not even cross the border. So they're just doing a stunt to embarrass Putin, even though they're not actually cross the border.
A lot of them got killed, didn't they, Mitch?
Yeah, Joel, because I heard, I can't remember from the top of my head, but got a lot of valuable Western equipment destroyed for bloody nothing, just for TikTok sort of stunt. And because the thing was, they took a few photos to say, oh, well, look at us, we're in this village inside Russia. Another one, they were in a little Ukrainian village just across, opposite said village I claimed to be in, called Rizhivka on the Ukrainian side. So, yeah, it's just a LARP. Of course, this doesn't help, you got Dmitry Medvedev, who keeps posting about Nazis in Latvia and Ukraine about all this, unfortunately. So we have to be subjected to more boomerism from the Russian establishment about all this. But it's just one of those things where, as I said, Ukrainians are just sending Russian volunteers who are all neo-Nazi LARPers. They're not really Russian nationalists. They're just guys who love to post themselves like swastikas or whatever, and very LARPy about it. They're not really nationalistic. They're just more misanthropic. They just don't like Putin. And then you've got all the Western equipment they took with them just gets smashed to pieces by artillery or drones.
I must admit, when I see some of the things Ukraine does, there are obviously PR stunts that give me a vibe of British Special Forces operations sometimes. They just do. It's the sort of thing the Brits did. They did it in World War II, done it since. Where you're aiming more for a PR result than a real result, if you see what I mean.
Yeah.
Like some of the commando raids the Brits did in World War II, some of which went disastrously wrong. and we've had them since. I mean, people know the story of Bravo 20, the SAS scud hunting expedition in Iraq in the first Gulf War, which was a total fuck up. I just see some of that in what the Ukrainians are doing, and we know there are British special forces there. I do. I see this kind of British spec ops thing in the background,
Yeah, so that's sort of more. I mean, on one hand, like, on one hand, it's like you got the Western equipment getting smashed to pieces, but it's also a lot of the guys they're using aren't actually Ukrainian, they're just like Russian neo-Nazi LARPer types who, like they're the kind of people who, you can imagine the Russians would just absolutely kill them, wouldn't bother taking them prisoners just because they're seen as traitors. So
yeah, absolutely. I mean, imagine if there were British guys fighting against Britain. What would we do?
Well, it's like even in World War II, you have a British Freikorps, which were like 43 men, and even men, they said we weren't going to fight against our co-ethnics. We'll fight against the Soviets, but not against the Brits. And the Germans just went, okay, then.
And some of those guys ended up getting executed in 1945 and 1946.
Yeah,
not many, it has to be said, but some did.
Well, I mean, you got. I can imagine Lord Haw. I can see the reasoning behind that. But like as I said, like most of the British Freikorps were just there because they're anti-communist, not because of any particular love for Hitler, or they just didn't like how we were allying ourselves with Stalin against Hitler when you could argue. I mean, fair enough. You can say, "Oh well, Hitler was a guy to some extent, you could say bloodthirsty or whatever." But I mean, Stalin. I mean, even like I'm reading a book about the Soviet Union, and like the levels of petty paranoia and vengefulness that Stalin possessed. You just think, why would you ally yourself with this character?
So, and up until 1941, Hitler was a mere amateur at mass murder compared to Stalin. Like a really small-scale amateur compared to Stalin, up until at least 1941.
Yeah, like the thing is, like I mean, you have Stalin, who, for example, he'll take out someone like Tukhachevsky because Tukhachevsky planned to write a book about the Battle of Warsaw, where it would say, because I mean, to be fair, Stalin was one of the main reasons why the Battle for Warsaw back in 1920 went so bad for the Soviets. But Stalin couldn't handle that because he's very petty. So he killed off Tukhachevsky, even though Tukhachevsky coined the deep battle doctrine, which Russia actually ended up using in World War II to great effect with Operation Bagration. But because Stalin was so petty and he wanted to ape all the achievements that the likes of Trotsky and Tukhachevsky did in the Civil War, he just ended up killing some of Russia's best military minds. And in their place, he put someone like Klement Voroshilov, who bungled the war with Finland.
Oh yeah, and Stalin cut the head off the Soviet military in the 30s with his purges, for sure.
Yeah, whereas you take on the Third Reich, you got Ernst Röhm and the SA, who, to be fair, if Hitler wanted to get long-term power, he had to wipe him out. It wasn't out of petty paranoia in the same way that Stalin did. It was just sure political ruthlessness in favor of solidifying the regime. You had also
and also Röhm, who was a homosexual, was also he wanted the SA to replace the Wehrmacht. He wanted to replace the German army, and one of the reasons for the Night of the Long Knives, as it's called, when Röhm and all these dudes were killed, was because Hitler knew that he was not going to get the support of the German army, and that was the one group that could get rid of him if he didn't get rid of Röhm and the SA leadership who wanted to replace them.
Yeah, so you have the only other closest things that Hitler did to a great purge of the army as well was the Frisch Blomberg affair, where he got rid of two generals. One because I think it was Blomberg who married a woman who turned out to be a prostitute or former prostitute in the days of violence.
Yeah.
And Fritsch, who apparently he was framed to be a homosexual. I don't know if that actually was true.
Yeah, he was. I've looked at this, Mitch, and yeah, it was. In fact, I think it was actually originally just a mistake for a guy with the same name. But eventually people realized it but continued with it, even though it wasn't the German field marshal.
Yeah, but that's the thing, like, you take a look at the Third Reich compared to Stalin's USSR, you just think, in terms of sheer bloodletting or in terms of maintenance of bodies, well, the Nazi version is a lot lighter compared to the Stalinist USSR.
I said, Hitler was a small-time amateur compared to Stalin in terms of mass murder up until the invasion of Russia.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
It was only at that stage that Hitler started to catch up. But I mean, even then, overall, Stalin probably killed more people.
Yeah, and also another thing was, so when Stalin was industrializing the USSR, because I'm reading this book where it just said it was so dysfunctional as well, where, let's say you get young men working in a factory, let's say Chelyabinsk or Novosibirsk or whatever, in central Russia. The conditions, the working conditions and the living conditions were so bad that these young men would actually abscond, go AWOL and live in and work in the countryside. It means like collective kolkhozes or sovkhozes. The only difference is the sovkhozes were actually directly watched over by commissars and were more scrutinized. So situations where farmers would starve to death because the commissars took all the food and so on. But about how dysfunctional it was, where the rural and the urban sort of authorities were at loggerheads over who gets the workers, who gets the young men in their respective industries. When you look at that and you go, how the hell did Stalinist USSR actually manage to outdo the Third Reich at the apex of the Second World War? Because it even says even in the time of even into like the 1960s or 70s, they were still importing food from America, even though the amount of arable land in the Soviet Union, it boggles your imagination how much food Ukraine alone can produce, let alone also southern Russia. And yet the Soviets had badly bungled the agricultural industry, so they had to still keep importing food from America, even like the time of Khrushchev and early Brezhnev era.
Well, communism doesn't work too well. That's a fact. And it took Russia a very long time, or rather, it took the Soviet Union a very long time to get over World War II, when so much was destroyed and so many people were killed. But also never forget the enormous amount of Western aid that was being sent to Stalin. It's not just the tanks and the fighter aircraft that came from Britain, by the way, as well as America. It's also the vast numbers of American trucks, the vast amounts of American food and jeeps and all the rest of it. So that by 1944, or late 1944 anyway, the Russian army was actually more mobile than the German army, because of another thing that most people don't even realize is that in World War II, other than the panzer divisions and the motorized divisions, the vast majority of the German army was still horse-drawn. Its supply wagons and its guns, etc., were still pulled by horses.
Hey, did you notice in my Death of Stalin film? Did you notice in my Death of Stalin film that the NKVD were found using Opel Blitz trucks from the Second World War? In my Death of Stalin film, where they're cleaning out Stalin's personal dacha, and some of the trucks they use to wheel away everything were German trucks, like these Opel Blitz, if I'm pronouncing that right. So, even in the post-war period, so I had a situation where, the NKV that we use in German or American trucks.
Absolutely true, Mitch. Vast amounts of Western aid, including quite a lot of British stuff, was sent to the Russians. I mean, in fact, Britain was sending stuff to Stalin and the communists instead of sending it to British garrisons in the Far East, who were facing the Japanese.
Yeah. So on one hand, I mean, you get. I mean, I don't. I mean, you get. I don't know what you make of some people, because you get the Russians on Twitter that will say, "Oh well, the Lend-Lease aid only came after Stalingrad, after the war had already had its turning point." I don't really know too much about Lend-Lease because I don't know. I wouldn't know where to look in terms of books as to the extent and when.
Also, the Soviets never had to pay that back, unlike the Brits, for example, who did.
Yeah, was it Semyagog or was it Prudentialist who said something along the lines of, "Oh yeah, like the Soviets were actually just astounded how much FDR was given to them because he wasn't even an agent of theirs. He was giving so much to the USSR. It was just mind-boggling.
Yep.
I think it was something. I mean, I don't know how you quantify this, but the technological transfer also from America into the USSR amidst World War II was sort of mind-boggling as well.
Oh look, post World War II, the Russians were flying an aircraft which was basically a reverse-engineered copy of a B-29 American bomber.
Well, yeah,
which of course they had captured during, well, not captured, supposedly, because they were supposedly allies, but had come down in Russia, and the Russians just reverse engineered the damn thing.
Well, yeah, you can see
there was a British naval officer I read, Mitch, who went to Murmansk, and because of the ice or something like that, his warship, his cruiser or destroyer, he came off, was kept in there longer, and he was allowed to wander around the outskirts of Murmansk a bit, and he came across a dump with 50 Spitfires just rotting, and these were 50 British Spitfires that had been sent to the Soviets that they didn't need, couldn't be asked to use, just let them rot. And this was and he actually said, this at a time when there wasn't a single Spitfire in the Far East when the Brits were fighting the Japanese.
Yeah, I heard also in this book, right, he said there's this, I mean, I can't even describe, you can describe it as funny, but morbidly funny. So in the early days of Operation Barbarossa, the Soviet Air Force was actually very ineffective. For one, all their planes would just crash into the ground, and the ejector seats weren't properly working, so many Soviet pilots died. Stalin is in a staff to high command going, "What the hell is happening that makes it so?" And a young man in the Air Force just went, "I was because all the planes are designed ship and produced race ship because it to match your production quotas." And Stalin just was so enraged by this guy's impudence that the guy got put into Gulag and probably got killed off in a penal battalion or something like that. So, yeah.
No surprise.
Morbid, very morbid detail, was very Stalinist thing to do. Just
Yeah, no, it's no surprise. But as I said, my ultimate, I mean, bringing us back to today, as we come towards the end of the stream, I've just got to say, I mean, you look at Rishi Sunak, who's an Indian banker, who was rejected, I think, having checked 3 times, even by the members of the so-called Conservative Party as Prime Minister. 3 times these people said, no, we don't want him. We'll have almost anybody else. But parachuted in, and there he is, British, in inverted commas, Prime Minister. You have the people in America who, talk about what went on in 2020 and how senile Joe Biden, supposedly the most popular president in the whole of American history, and all the shenanigans that went on around there. And, to say nothing about Hunter Biden and his cocaine and his underage wars in Ukraine and all the money that is going into the Biden crime family. Let's not talk about that. But yeah, we'll talk about Putler and his election. To me, it's like the height of hypocrisy. It just is.
Well, have you heard the news about so Nigel Farage is set to return to reform? News that just came out like half an hour ago. Yeah, I put it in my private chat.
Adam and I were talking about that before you came on, Mitch. So, have you actually seen that, Mitch? Oh, sorry, Adam.
I put in private chat.
Yeah, I'm just.
Yeah, no, I did see the link, mate.
Oh, I thought you was asking me then for a second before you said Ataman. So.
No, that's fine, mate. I did actually see your private chat message. I hadn't seen it. I'm just wondering if Ammon had checked it, because Ammon knows more about reform than I do.
No, I wasn't aware of this. Some people did used to say that essentially Tice was just a seat warmer for Farage. I did see that as quite believable, but of course we don't really know much in the way of details. Like, he never really left the party. He's still because it's technically it's a company rather than a straight up political party. So they don't have membership elections and stuff like that. So he could just walk back into the leadership seat or what? It remains to be seen. I mean, if they do that, they will actually become a real electoral force again.
If Farage comes back, yeah, big time. If Farage comes back, I would say the Conservatives are going to be very worried.
Yeah, we need 0 seats. Like, we need to make a meme become reality. Like, I don't know. Perhaps he might put a smile on Peter Hitchens' face for a change. We just need that.
I doubt that, but yeah, I hope
one
so.
Can dream. I know, but beat him dooming all the time. So
yeah, no, I hope that is correct, Mitch. I really do, because I think Farage is the one dude who could change things if he put his mind to it and really wanted to do so. I don't see anyone else with his what's the right word? I don't see anyone else with his stature in British politics.
What, gravitas or charisma or?
Yeah, and he's got the Brexit vote behind him. He's shown that he actually can get British people to go against the establishment when he wants to. He's the only one. I don't know anybody else. Look, he's the closest thing Britain has to a Trump, I would say. I hope he won't be as ineffectual as Trump proved in his first term as president. But I think Farage is undoubtedly the closest Britain has to that. And if he does come back, I will just support him. And particularly if he talks about mass immigration, I will absolutely support him.
Well, I mean, you can imagine he will. I don't know how much he'll talk about the boats. But then again, he does talk about legal immigration more, doesn't he? I can't remember the last time he did from memory, but I'm pretty sure he is very like, I mean, you can, I mean, I don't know, like, you could say on one hand, if it's like, if he completes, I mean, I don't know how many I don't know how many reform MPs you'd get, but you can imagine there will be quite a few, because people are so desperate for a right-wing alternative, they'll vote for Farage. And to be fair, sweetened by the fact that Farage actually is quite charismatic, whereas Richard Tice, I mean,
is not.
Well, I mean, so some people say it's a seat warmer. It was kind of like, how many leaders have done that historically? Let's say you could be a very charismatic leader, but after them comes someone who's completely mediocre, or just putting a seat warmer to keep things slightly active because they're unavailable. Let's say, I don't know. I hate referring to I hate referring to Mustache Man all the damn time, but he did do the same when he got locked up for that Beehole putsch, where he put Rosenberg in charge of a party. And Rosenberg, he was an ideologue, but he wasn't. There was nothing to him that inspired leadership. So
yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not sure I would. I'm not sure I'd compare Nigel Farage to.
It's the only example I've got.
The mid-century German dudes, but yeah.
It's the only example I know of, because I don't know anyone in our history that I know of who actually did the same way, but put just a seat warmer in to keep things busy while they were themselves unavailable for whatever reason. I can't think of any figure in our history.
Yeah, well, look, if that's true and he does come back, yeah, I mean, like I said, especially if he talks about doing something about mass immigration, I'll certainly support him. I mean, you know, what do we have to lose in Britain at the moment? I mean, he can't be worse than Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer. So I don't know. We seem to have lost Armand. Oh no, he's back. Wait a minute.
Oh, sorry about that.
That's okay. I'm just saying, if Farage is coming back, and I mean, all right, this is a newspaper report, but if it is true, and I hope it is, and especially if Farage is willing to talk about mass immigration, I would certainly support him, because we've got nothing to lose, basically. I mean, you know, he can't be worse than Rishi Sunak and Sir Keir Starmer.
I mean, he's not going to win.
Not that I think he's going to win the election, but I think he could get reform parliamentary representation, and maybe up in the 20s of, maybe even 30s of MPs, 20s anyway.
Because of the way our, first past the post system works, probably not, but he will just break down the Tory vote even further.
Yeah,
I'd give him a chance for sure.
Well, it's going to be insufferable when you see all these Tory boy types go, "Oh, Nigel Farage is the reason why we got Keir Starmer and all the gay race communists and whatnot." It's going to be insufferable when the election actually does happen and you just get all those types coming out of the woodwork.
Yeah.
So,
but then we just have to remind them that they had the chance.
To which my reply would be, Rishi Sunak and the people who run the Conservative Party is why we've got Keir Starmer and all the gay race communists. That's what I'd say.
What's something about? I mean, it's what? I mean, you got that Kemi Bad Enoch woman who she's a psyop in and of herself. Just how
decidedly not Anglo-Celtic. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole Bad Enoch meme, so that's the only thing I can think of when it comes to that person. Then you've got the fact that was she still said something along the lines of, "Oh well, we're the party that had the first Jewish prime minister. We're the first party that had the first female prime minister," and blah blah blah. And he's sort of thinking, yeah, it's like, oh yeah, Labour are racist. They're true racists and sexists. And I go, you're telling me? I mean, say what you're about Labour, but Tories are the ones doing that sort of rhetoric. I'd rather the red Tories just get wrecked, and we have like 5 years of Labour. Just so as Tories get smashed all together in hopes that someone like Nigel Farage just carries things on. I mean, he's a Nigel Farage like 60 at this point or something. Like, he'd be 60 this year, I think. He's born on.
Yeah, but I mean, compared to the likes of Biden and Trump, he's not that old.
I'm just thinking, why? But you can imagine Nigel Farage is just thinking, well, on one hand, because he wants to. I mean, I can understand, like, because he said after the referendum result, like, he just wanted to chill. because he spent 20 years getting it for it, and he went through a lot of stick. Like there were cases where if he went to a pub for dinner with his family, left-wing activists would just be around to harangue him. So he couldn't even have a public dinner in peace with his family. I can understand him wanting to chill, but then at the same time, it's also, well, you can imagine there's also a sense of duty on his part if he does indeed feel that way. But at the end of the day, look, Britain's going to deteriorate.
Yeah, I mean, look, we will have to see how true it is that Farage is going to return to active politics. I mean, I hope it's true because I think he's the only guy in modern British politics who could change things. The only single guy that I can think of, anyway, who has enough. He's well enough known, that he could, and he's got a track record of getting Brexit through. So who knows? It's a little bit of hope. I mean, like you said, Mitch, I think it's a small possible white pill. Let's wait and see. We'll have to see what happens. Maybe by next week we'll have some more details. And I would just like to say before we close out, and I ask my guests if they've got anything they want to share, etc. Do watch our stream next week because we have a very special guest coming on next week who I've wanted to have on for a very long time. So you should be joining us next week. Not going to say who it is at this point, but do watch this space, and very much looking forward to that one. In the meantime, Alman, is there anything you would like to share, mate?
No, I'm just not looking forward to having to get reinvested in politics again.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, because we've all been saying, it's like waste of time. If Farage comes back, we'll have to take it a bit more seriously,
Yeah,
but maybe
they still won't run in my
thing.
area, so I kind of get away with this. To be fair, I can still not vote and pretend to be contrarian.
or maybe if he comes back, he'll put up a candidate in your area. Maybe.
No, definitely not. But in the last election, I think this was the one of only 2 or 3 regions in the country where Labour actually increased their vote share. So it's a lost constituency to anyone on the right.
But I don't know.
And that would have only gotten worse
because
since the last election.
I don't know about that though, Adam, because if you look how left-wing the so-called Conservatives really are, maybe if you had a real right-wing party there, that would not be the case.
The problem is that our constituency is quite wealthy and is also very white, still to this point. Probably one of the only constituencies in the country that still is. And they don't see all these problems. And especially over the last couple of years, there's a lot of people that have moved here from London. But it's not like, let's say, Southend-on-Sea. It's just far enough away that the sort of people that move here are either digital nomads or they're sort of people that only have to commute in once or twice a week on like hybrid office hours. And they're always the biggest shitlips you can find.
Sadly. Yeah, no, I know exactly what you're talking about there. Yeah, we have them in Australia, in Melbourne. They're all too common. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
But yeah, other than that, nothing to shill. Maybe in the future.
All right. Mitch, anything you wanted to shill, mate?
No, not for me. I mean, I think the only stream I know of is Survivor Joy is doing some stream about the origins of the Germanic tribes.
Yeah, I saw that. That looks interesting. I like Tom Rouse, Survivor the Jive. He's excellent.
Yeah,
definitely second that recommendation.
You know what's funny about Tom Booth, fellow that Ataman mentioned, so he did like some written paper where he's going about how the plague impacted Black Londoners and all. But then in the same report, he's also saying, "Oh yeah, like the quote-unquote far right understand genomes better than we academics." And I'm just thinking, what does that say about the likes of you then? If I don't know, like
Hmm.
like an amateur geneticist. Like, I mean, Ataman, who, you know, he's just an average guy, knows more about genetics than the average fucking gormless shitlib who passes for academia.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you. It's
Yeah.
definitely not
That
my
is a good-
main subject, but yeah, a lot of them are like basically retarded.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
know what's going to happen.
I would definitely say do check out Survive the Jive on YouTube, and Tom Rouse, which is his X stroke Twitter handle. Do check him out. He's got a lot of good stuff, and he's a good historian too. That's one reason I started watching him, is because his history's pretty damn accurate. But he also does a lot of this stuff on DNA and all the rest of it, which I know myself very little about. But yeah.
Well, it's very statistical, very mathematical and analytical sort of stuff, which doesn't really appeal to the average guy. Like, I mean, it took me like 3 years to fully understand what the bell beakers and the logs of the bell beakers and Neolithics and the hunter gatherers were genetically. It took me bloody ages to acknowledge that because I just wasn't really interested. So I can't imagine what it's like for someone who's not interested in history to understand that sort of niche topic.
But he has he has some good stuff, Mitch. Looking at Cheddar Man, for example, and the way that the people who you remember when this was a big deal. What was it, 4 or 5 years ago now? When they put him out, they made him as black as they could make him, and far blacker than he likely was, and they did it on purpose. You know.
Yeah, I mean, if you were to imagine like the hunter gatherers, you'd probably have to imagine something like, I don't know, would you count Mads Mikkelsen as being swarthy because he's got slightly darker skin tone compared to probably he would look something, or hunter gatherers would look like you know, Javier Bardem from No Country for Old Men, like look like him but with a beard. Essentially, that's the darkest they get, like swarthy. So the kind of people you get in Portugal or northern Spain.
Yeah. Like a med type person. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. You're right. Yeah, but with blue eyes. But they had blue eyes.
Yeah, and it's like, they had blue eyes. Then you have the Neolithics who, basically they look like you can think of Neolithics as looking like Monica Bellucci and that sort of phenotype. I mean, you've got the Bell Beakers who. The average.
I tell you one thing, Mitch. If they look like Monica Bellucci, I will go back in time immediately.
I can just imagine. Like, the Bell Beakers. I mean, they will. They look like. I imagine they look like. Well, they look like us. Like our phenotypes are basically theirs. Like, you know, sort of paler skin, bearded, fair haired. You know. You can just imagine, like, you know, 6'1" tall bell beaker bloke just chasing after like a group of Neolithic women after he just slaughtered all the men in the village. So, like, you can imagine, like, I don't know, let's say someone like Duke just like chasing a group of like women who all look like Monica Bellucci or whatever.
Such a thing. But anyway, yeah, but yeah, there's a lot of interesting history there. And also, don't forget, if you go back to those early farming communities, most guys didn't breed. You know, they didn't. It's only a minority of blokes who bred. Women did, but not blokes.
I don't know too much about
because of the way, because they worked on kind of harem systems and so on. You know.
I was going to say, I think one of the main reasons why that particular period of history is so sort of enchanting, or however you describe it, is like a lot of it's just connecting the dots. Like, you're having to make guesswork or having to use your imagination. It's like the Anglo-Saxon invasion. You know, some people reckon there was an apartheid system where the Welsh and the native Britons were just seen as cannon fodder and just generally mistreated all the damn time. Whereas genome research kind of tells you, okay, well, the Anglo-Saxons and Celts, they might have been different for a time, but once everyone converted to Christianity, it would have been more, they would just intermix so much that there'd just be no difference after a time. Like, I mean, fair enough, the Celts would have assimilated into the English ethnic group. Like, they start speaking English and dump their native Celtic languages. But like, aside from that, like, they just mix to the point where they just create what we are today, like the English.
I was actually watching a Survive the Giant video about this, and he was pointing out how there's a graduation in Celtic DNA that becomes stronger in the West, so in Cornwall and in Wales and what have you. But it's a graduation, you know, it's not there's no cut-off point. It's a graduation. And of course, the same thing happens in southern Scotland as well.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's because on one hand, you have the Celts over here and the Anglo-Saxons. They basically came from the same stock, the Bell Beakers. They just came from a slight differences in the sense that, you know, like the Bell Beaker tribes that created, you know, the Anglo-Saxons came from like an area north of the Rhine, whereas the Celtic tribes that the Bell Beaker tribes that the Celts stem from came from Bell Beaker tribes who were south of the Rhine. That's the only real difference really between the Celts and Anglo-Saxons on a genetic basis, is they just happen to be on different sides of the same of one river in Germany, straddling.
Yeah, look, Adam and I were speaking before you came on, Mitch. I don't know if you heard it, but like the thing is that the Anglo-Saxons and the Jutes and the Celts and the Danes and even the Normans and later on the Protestant Huguenots, they're all very closely genetically related Northwest European people. You know, none of them are distant. And certainly there's no comparison with groups of those people getting together compared to people from sub-Saharan Africa and East Asia and Southeast Asia and, you know, the mess that we have today.
Yeah, what's funny is so you have the Normans, right? Because I mean, on one hand, yeah, they were French in the sense that they spoke a French language. However, genetically, like if you look at their haplogroups, they're basically just Scandinavian in the sense like about I1 or I2. I don't know if it's I1 or I2 for Scandinavia, but that particular haplogroup, which Survivor Drive himself has personally, that's linked. That's a very genetically bottlenecked haplogroup linked to Nordic Bronze Age kings. So if you've got that particular haplogroup, you've got a very well storied. So, like as far as your bloodline goes, you can trace your ancestry definitively to old Nordic Bronze Age kings in modern day Sweden, Norway, or Denmark. Although Denmark has a lot more R1b rather than I2 or I1, whichever one it is. But yeah, very genetically bottlenecked genome. The Normans, in terms of William the Conqueror and the nobles around him, they all had that Scandinavian haplogroup in them. Yep. That then goes into the but they're also looking at Alfred the Great probably would have had it as well, because he was also of Anglo-Saxon noble stock. Anglo-Saxon nobility, they probably would have had that very similar haplogroup, or but yeah. So as far as
and as we have said before, Alfred the Great, who was a great Christian king who had visited Rome and encouraged reading and learning in England and stuff, he still claimed descent from Mozart. You know.
Yeah. So I mean, it's quite funny. There's also this story of Edric the Wild where there's a lot of mentions of elves. So even in like the time of Norman invasion, like we still had most of our folklore largely being very pagan in themes, even though we were devoutly Christian people. So I don't know. I think it's just like another tirade of me going, "Oh, yeah, the pagan versus Christian divide is just retarded again." So I'll probably never get tired of saying that because it's actually retarded.
But yeah, but I mean, you know, the early Christians in England, like Alfred the Great, and his the Witten and all this kind of stuff. Alfred the Great still claimed descent from Wotan, so which is like the English version of Odin, basically. So there wasn't some sort of cutoff going on here. There was a
degree of continuity, yeah.
Yeah, there was a continuity of belief and what have you. And Christian churches were often placed on pagan religious sites. The Christians, even in the ancient Roman era, often co-opted pagan festivals, etc. So there was a continuity going on all the time. It's not a total break with stuff. And the early Christians, it's impossible to imagine early Western Christians without Greco-Roman learning, etc. And their worldview. You would have been impossible to have early Christianity without that. So yeah, I definitely think that stuff's interesting. So for sure. Anyway, we've been going for almost 2.5 hours. So unless anybody has anything else they would like to bring up, Adam and Mitch?
No, nothing from me. I've just been
Well,
sitting
I
here
hope
trying to
both
get Bing AI to make a picture of Snoopy standing at trial at The Hague for war crimes in Yugoslavia, but it won't let me do it no matter how I try to word it.
Snoopy did nothing wrong, that's what I say. But anyway, I like dogs. But anyway, I hope both you gents will join us next week. As I say, when we're going to have a very special guest on, who I think the audience will be quite interested to hear. So we'll see you next week for Splendid Isolation, number 164. And in the meantime, don't let the bastards grind you down. Go well, folks.